The Kansas City Chiefs have selected Omarr Norman-Lott, 63 overall, for the defensive line. Welcome to the Scrambling Armchair, Chiefs news analysis and opinion every day. So who is Omarr Norman-Lott, and what does this selection mean for the Kansas City Chiefs in a more broad sense? Now, this video is in a playlist on the channel called 2025 Draft Picks, and there will be two videos for each of these selections, a reaction video, which this is for Omarr Norman-Lott, and a long-form deep analysis video. We have already done the Chiefs' first round selection, Josh Simmons, and here we are for Omarr Norman-Lott, 6'2" and 7/8 inches, 6'1" and 7/8 inches. He's a 6'2" defensive tackle, 291 pounds, so a little bit on the light side, but he has those 33 3/4 inch arms, 10 3/4 inch hands. Those are tools that will be good for him at that defensive tackle position. 5'17", 40-yard dash, 179, 10-yard split, a 31.5-inch vertical, and a 9'5" broad jump. Not the most athletic guy in the world, but you're looking at a defensive tackle. So what was it that he did at the college level? He played 3 years for Arizona State, 2 years for Tennessee in the SEC, and he stepped his game up once he got to the SEC, which is indicative of a larger point for Omarr Norman-Lott. He does play better against better competition, and he elevates his game, and that will serve him well at the NFL level, hopefully, because this is a league where 17 games against the best competition in the world, and then the playoffs where things get ramped up even more. What was his production like? Well, not a whole lot at Arizona State. He had a 0 sack, freshman year, didn't play a whole lot in his second freshman year, like second breakfast. A little bit more with 2 sacks, 30 tackles, 4 tackles for loss. But when he got to the SEC, he really came into himself. His junior year, 5.5 sacks at Tennessee, 6 tackles for loss, and 26 tackles. A little bit of a step backwards in his senior season, but I think this is probably more because he was a focus along that defensive line than the fact that he regressed. He had 4 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and 18 tackles total. So what are the Kansas City Chiefs getting in Omarr Norman-Lott? Well, at that defensive tackle position for the Kansas City Chiefs, the number 2 defensive tackle has been a bit of a sore spot for this defense for quite some time. He is going to be, in my opinion, an instant starter next to Chris Jones. He's the second most talented defensive tackle on the roster immediately, and that means he's going to get reps. This is the most dynamic pass rusher to line up next to Chris Jones at the defensive tackle position that I can remember. The entire time Chris Jones has been the star that he is. And remember, he ramped up a little bit. Chris Jones ramped up in his career as well. But the entire time he has had a bit of a vacant spot next to him. That is no longer the case. So if teams choose to go ahead and remain focused on Chris Jones, they're going to have a bit of a problem with Omarr Norman-Lott. He is a little bit of a liability versus the run. Not the greatest run defender in this class, but the Chiefs have spent a lot of time and resources trying to find a run-stuffing defensive tackle to put next to Chris Jones, because Chris Jones stepped up last year a lot, but he has a little bit of a weakness, has traditionally had a little bit of a weakness versus the run as well. But with Omarr Norman-Lott, and we'll get to this later, I don't think you're going to have problems versus the run. He's not Derek Nottie, okay? So he's not going to be this guy who is a run-stuffing defensive tackle, but he's not going to allow offenses to get complacent in their blocking schemes either because of Chris Jones next to him. He is a high-motor player, very intense player. This is the type of player that we are seeing Brett Veach focus on drafting, trying to locate in the draft and take these high-intensity, high-motor players, especially at the defensive line positions. So adding Omarr Lott to this mix, I think you have what will be a very concentrated defensive line, and maybe not the depth still that the Kansas City Chiefs want. Not a whole lot of rotation at the defensive tackle position at this point. I think you're looking at Fabian Levette going to be the third defensive tackle. probably still a little bit of room on this roster for the Chiefs to go ahead and draft someone. Probably you will see a run-stuffing defensive tackle either taken in the draft or as a UDFA if any fall out of the draft. So that is what we are looking at there. Now, as far as the pass rush, he has an arsenal of pass rush moves, and he will naturally transition between them. He does look to me, you hear a lot of talk in the draft about guys that don't come with a plan, and that will hurt them at the NFL level if they can't develop that skill, if they cannot develop a pass rush plan, depending on who's across from them, depending on what kind of offense is being run. Omarr Norman-Lott just kind of transitions between all of his pass rush moves. You will see him convert power to speed, which behooves him when he is lining up wider than a nose tackle, right? When you see him take an outside shade on the offensive guard, that has proven good for him in the pass rush department. He even has a spin move that I've seen him use quite a few times. It's a little bit blocky, but it happens, right? So, and like I've said numerous times here, I don't think you develop a spin move. I think you have it or you don't, especially when you get over the 250-pound range, and he's close to 300. That type of move is difficult to pull off. I don't know if it's going to translate to the NFL because it is. I think that he's going to get shoved by better offensive guards in the NFL. But look, not everybody has a starting offensive guard, so he will be able to pull it off sometimes in the NFL. He seems to, like I said earlier, elevate against better competition. And if he can be coached up into more consistency, into being that guy all the time, it's going to be a good selection for the Kansas City Chiefs. One of the things that he gets knocked on a little bit, and possibly made him fall to the end of the second round, is he has not been an absolute stalwart of the defensive line. He is more of a rotational player. I think I saw the stat and I didn't write it down. He's never played more than 33 snaps in any game. And probably at this point with the Kansas City Chiefs, he's going to have to be counted on to do that because the Chiefs do not have the deepest defensive tackle group. And if he can convert that intensity to consistency, I don't think he's going to suffer because of it. I think that the Tennessee defensive line just likes to rotate. So, he's going to rotate in Kansas City, too, eventually. I think that Steve Spagnuolo likes to keep his defensive line fresh. Now, I do think that he offers some versatility for the edge position, and we'll get to this a little bit more. But if he's going to offer you defensive tackle, nose tackle, and edge capabilities, he's going to be on the field more. So if that motor keeps up, that's a good thing. Honestly, though, with his talent, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the Kansas City Chiefs that he rotated so much in college because it's keeping the tread on the tires. This is a guy who did play 5 years in college. So the age, Brett Veach likes to concentrate on younger players that have more upside in them. He's a little bit more of a finished product. So maybe not the highest potential, maybe not the highest growth that you could see out of Omarr Norman-Lott, but with that tread on his tires still, the Chiefs benefit from that. The Chiefs are going to benefit from having a player who has so much left in the tank, has not been worn down at the college level. Now, I think he will be a difference maker for this team on first down, for sure. First down is a passing down in the NFL now. So it's not a running down. You're not trying to get to 2nd and 6. You're trying to get to first down again. So being on the field for first down is a big deal. He's going to be a difference maker on 3rd and long because he gets to just pin his ears back and go. When you pair him pinning his ears back and going with Chris Jones pinning his ears back and going, I think you're going to see a lot of problems for offensive lines because, again, you can only double team one of those guys before you end up taking people off of routes. You have to keep a tight end in to help your offensive tackle against one of the Chiefs' edge players. and then you can double team both of those guys. Maybe you have to keep a back in the backfield to chip. Whatever it is, the Chiefs have now added a pass rush, almost a pass rush specialist at the defensive tackle position, which will behoove them because they're trying to get back to the upper echelon in the NFL in sacks. The Chiefs defense really struggled last year when they couldn't get pressure on a quarterback. The Chiefs defense struggled last year because they were giving up a lot of passes to tight ends, and so normally the tight end routes, and really we didn't see that the Chiefs struggle with tight end routes over the middle of the field to an inordinate degree. It was tight ends getting downfield that really destroyed the Chiefs defense last year. And Omarr Norman-Lott being on the field will make it more difficult for an offense to allow a tight end that type of time to get downfield. So the pass-heavy teams in the NFL are going to have to account for Omarr Norman-Lott lining up next to Chris Jones. What does this do for the defensive line as a whole? This allows Chris Jones to be Chris Jones. He's going to be able to really take advantage of less concentrated attention from an offense, because Omarr Norman-Lott will give your quarterback headaches. Omarr Norman-Lott will be in your quarterback's lap. Omarr Norman-Lott does have the strength to push an offensive guard back. He does have the strength to push a center back. And if you have Chris Jones absolutely demolishing a pocket for the quarterback, Omarr Norman-Lott is a guy who can be there to clean that up. I think that he will show. We'll get to that in a moment. But, oh no, we're getting to it now. I apologize. Omarr Norman-Lott sometimes gets wide on his pass rush moves. So he will bow out, flex out, while trying to get to the quarterback in order to utilize his motor, his speed, his intensity, to get an edge on players, to get an edge on an offensive guard. And that allows, at times, the quarterback a lane up the middle if he's a running quarterback, or a quarterback who is a pocket passer to step up in the pocket. And offensive linemen in the NFL are better at just, if you want to go outside, we can go outside. I will ride that wave and take you out of the pass rush lane completely. So he will need to clean that up a little bit in the NFL. But as far as the defensive tackle position at large, Fabian Levette can kind of graduate to that Derek Noddy role, where he can be in the middle of the defense and be a run stuffer, not the biggest guy in the world, but a technique-savvy guy who just takes away a rushing lane. So that part of the Chiefs defense, I think that's why we saw the Chiefs move on from Derek Noddy this offseason, because they could afford to if Fabian Levette does develop into the type of defensive tackle that Derek Noddy was. Omarr Norman-Lott will step up into the Turk Wharton role. Tershawn Wharton, very underrated, but, and maybe not after this offseason because of the contract that he signed, is he underrated, but he did a lot of the work for the Kansas City Chiefs that kind of just had to be done. Omarr Norman-Lott provides upside to Tershawn Wharton, but I don't know in the pass rush, but I don't know that he provides a whole lot of upside to Tershawn Wharton as a run stuffer. Tershawn was more stout than he was given credit for, even though Tershawn entered the league it was listed at 260 pounds. Whether or not he played an NFL down at that weight, I doubt, but he was listed coming out of college and even on the Chiefs roster for a long time at 260 pounds. Omarr Norman-Lott is a little bit undersized, under 300 pounds. I don't know, just looking at him, if he has a whole lot of room for growth. If you could get him to that 300-pound range, I don't think he'll ever be a 310, 315-pound defensive tackle. And I don't think you necessarily want him to. I think that if you're going to be trying to get size at defensive tackle, you just have a different defensive tackle on the field. He does have long arms, but I think he needs to get better at getting those arms up into passing lanes. He only batted down 2 passes in college as far as official stats are concerned, and those happened at Arizona State. So Chris Jones and George Karlaftis are good at getting their hands up. Omarr Norman-Lott will need to learn that, because I think that until he gets acclimated to the NFL game, which, sometimes motor, sometimes intensity translates to the NFL. Sometimes it just doesn't, especially at the defensive tackle position. He's not going to get the money downs as often in the NFL. He's not going to get downs where he's able to just outclass offensive guards and centers like he was in college and get straight to the quarterback. So getting those hands up will go a long way in making sure that his presence is felt by the quarterback. This is a starter for the Kansas City Chiefs. So Josh Simmons in round 1 definitely has starter potential. Again, obviously it's the health, it's the injury concerns with Josh Simmons. A starter at defensive tackle immediately for the Kansas City Chiefs will improve the defense, will make things easier for the defensive backs in Kansas City, even if it makes things a little bit harder on the linebackers, because he is a bit of a liability versus the run. He's good. So when the offensive line is trying to take him a direction, trying to down block him, for example, he's good at reading that and saying, well, if you want me to go there, I'm just going to put one of these hands on you and we're going to stop this momentum right now. So I don't know if he is as good after that. So stopping the momentum is one thing, but at that point you have to be able to make an arm tackle on a running back. I do not see that necessarily from Omarr Norman-Lott. But again, I think this is a move to get nastier in the pass rush. He gave an interview after he was drafted, and he was self-described. They asked him, how do you describe yourself? And he said, I am relentless and unforgiving. Maybe the most underrated thing about Omarr Norman-Lott is he's kind of a mean guy, and you need that at defensive tackle. You need that on the defense in general, and he is that guy. He is a guy that comes in with a chip on his shoulder. Again, something that we have seen Brett Veach attempt to really accrue these types of players, guys that do have chips on their shoulders, guys that are nasty. And he was asked in that same interview about I guess he spent some time as a bouncer in college, right? Being basically security at a club or something like that. I don't know where, but as a bouncer. And when he was asked this question, he laughed. He laughed about being a bouncer. And you can only imagine what kind of memories were going through his mind at that moment that made him laugh. I've seen a few interviews with him now. I've never seen him laugh. But when he was asked about, hey, you get to be mean to people and get paid for it, what was that like? Oh, well, those were some of the greatest days of my life. That is a good sign for a guy at defensive tackle. And it's a good sign for someone lining up next to Chris Jones. Chris Jones is a very emotional player. Chris Jones is someone who feeds on the moment. And frankly, this is a little bit of the psychology. This is a little bit of woo-woo from yours truly. But a guy like this could rejuvenate Chris Jones. You don't often hear about the psychology of football, and the psychology of football might be why we're seeing Shedeur Sanders fall till day 3 of the NFL draft. Shedeur Sanders really comes across, I guess, as entitled. You hear that time and again from people who have done interviews with him. And for the quarterback position, that's not a great thing. Now, do I think that Shedeur Sanders is a 4th round pick, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick? No, I don't. But at quarterback, that hurts you. At defensive line, being a mean guy is something that helps you. I don't see a sense of entitlement with Omarr Norman-Lott. To the contrary, you see someone who seems to be very, very about business, very, very, I'm going to make offenses pay for trying to score on my defense. And that psychology infused to this defense right next to Chris Jones is going to pay dividends I think, immediately for the Kansas City Chiefs. The idea that Omarr Norman-Lott is going to be, as much as Chris Jones may benefit from the psychology of Omarr Norman-Lott next to him, Omarr Norman-Lott is going to get the chance to sit down and learn from Chris Jones. And look, this might be one of those things that has sort of maximal ability to feed off of itself, right? So you see players feed off of each other. That might be what happens along this defensive line for Omarr Norman-Lott and Chris Jones. That is all I have for this video. I will be back later with the round 3 picks and with long-form discussions on these players. So consider hitting the subscribe button if you are not already. Hitting the like button really does help me out. And make sure to come back for those videos because they will be in-depth analysis as well.